Well, first off, thanks to Minnesota Pork Producers for inviting me. Thanks to you all for everything you do to support our efforts in Washington, because after all, people like me are just registered lobbyists and, members of Congress and their staff and other people in Washington really like to hear from you. And there are a lot of people in this room, and you know them, who have been on the NPPC board, or have been in leadership with Minnesota Pork, or have, I picked up the phone or somebody else in the NPPC office, can you come to Washington and testify? Can you do this? Can you do that? And we really appreciate it. It makes our job a lot easier. So thank you. I'm going to give you an overview of trade issues that we're involved in. Not everything, though, because that'd be a whole lot more than you want to hear. Probably I'll fall asleep, but I'm going to try and top-line things and then leave time for questions. And I asked Larry, when I start getting near the time, give me the high sign, because I really never have met a microphone that they didn't like. Okay, well, they're working on that. I'm going to tell you guys about this slide. And if there's anything you folks remember from this presentation, I hope you remember this slide, because this one picture really tells the story of what's going on in this industry. And these are our exports, plotted by year, and the lines represent major trade deals. And so we're starting back in 1989 with the U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement, and then when Mexico was added into NAFTA, the Uruguay round, which we were positively impacted by getting access in a lot of markets, but the big ones in particular being Japan and South Korea. Then the U.S.-Taiwan deal, which was before Taiwan became a WTO member, we basically had a ban. Most of these countries, some countries we had access, a lot of them we didn't have any access before these trade deals. Then when China and Taiwan became WTO members, the Russia deal, we'll talk a little bit more, and most of you know we're having some problems in Russia now, but just a few years ago, we were hardly selling anything to Russia. And in 2004, back in the Bush administration, Bob Zelk, who was then the U.S. Trade Rep, and Al Johnson, real good guy who was a good friend of this industry. We worked with NPPC, worked very closely with them, and they negotiated a deal that really got us in the market. And but for that deal, we wouldn't be having the problems we're having now. It's really been a runaway success story in Russia. The Australian deal, we couldn't export anything but some canned pork before that deal. And we still have barriers there. In a lot of these countries, we have barriers. But folks, as you'll see here, you're the low-cost producers in the world. Safest, most affordable, highest quality pork in the world. And when we get access, our exports go up. And that would be a good way. Okay. So, just a little bit of review here. Last year, we in 2008, we had an unbelievable year. Up over 50% vis-a-vis 2007. Almost $5 billion of product. We really knew going into 2009, we weren't going to see that sort of year. And that, of course, with H1N1. It was a done deal. Their exports were going to be down somewhat. But the full-year data isn't out yet. But even with the decline from 2008, when you look at 2009, it exceeds even 2007. It's the best year we ever had, except 2008. And you can see here our top markets, and big difference between 2008 and 2009, right here, okay? China, Hong Kong. And we include Hong Kong because a lot of that is a great market. vegetable out there is actually in Hong Kong, and it's product that moves into China. That happens in a lot of industries, not necessarily through Hong Kong, but that's the reality. So we're down significantly, down there, and also in Russia. Okay, again, looking back over time, you can see how our exports and net exports just subtract that imports. So we've got net exports and exports plotted here, and you see the very sharp upward trajectory. And as a percent of production, and when you look at where we were in 08, we're about at 20%. Okay, who else is exporting in the world? And again, what's this recent phenomenon a function of? This is primarily about trade, because if you don't have access to a market, you can't sell there. And global economic growth. First thing people do when they have money in their pocket is eat. And they get more money, they upgrade to a meat-based diet. You can see the United States, #1 exporter in the world. Brazil is an emerging competitor. The EU is, for a number of reasons, higher cost producer, probably declining in shipments outside the EU going forward. Canada is a good competitor, but as you know, they're contracting significantly up there, and we're a lower cost producer. Okay, this slide is showing us, as good as it's been in terms of the overall trend, there's a lot of room for growth in the world. We're at our year in and year out, Japan is usually our #1 export market. But look at this, we're only in Japan at 50% of consumption. There's a lot of room for growth there, which is why in the Doha round for years, NPPC's position, the board took a position that in order for us to support a deal, we're going to have a huge outcome in two places: Japan, first and foremost, and also the European Union. And when you look at these other markets, you see there's a lot of room for growth. If you look at Korea, and I give Korea a lot of credit. We've got this pending FTA. They're the first country in Asia that's going to zero on many food and ag products. They excluded rice, which got a lot of press. Very sensitive product there, and that's unfortunate for U.S. rice producers. But they're going to zero on pork once it gets implemented, so it's a priority. Congress is very focused on it right now. But the Iowa, Thurman Hayes is the Iowa State economist number for that agreement alone. It's going to, over the life of the 10-year implementation period, it's going to add $10 a head. So you can see in these markets, there's just all sorts of room for further growth. I talked a little bit about population, and if we went out to 2050, and hopefully I don't have to work at 2050, and hopefully I'm still around. At that point, the world population is projected to be over 9 billion, but it is growing, and that means more mouths to feed when people have the money to buy food. And there's been world economic growth, and there's going to continue to be world economic growth. We're obviously in a global downturn now, but again, that means we get the access and have more people eating, and more people having enough money to have the choice to have a meat-based diet. And who's going to reap the benefits? These numbers were put together by Thurman Hayes of Iowa State. The caveat is, these things change based on exchange rates and other things. But as of earlier this month, this is the way it stacks up. And we're a low-cost producer in the world. And again, looking short term, probably not going to have a strong dollar. And for our exports, that's a pretty good thing. Okay. Usually up here I like to say, well, successes. Talking about our successes last year. But you'll lose the mind, most of you, many of you, for 2 years running, and really it's hard to call 2009 a successful year, especially getting complicated here and problems we've had here. But there were, on the trade front, there were some good things that happened. One of which is, we're not on the Mexican trucking retaliation list. And if you remember back in 2008, we had some periods where we were totally out of the market for a while, as we are now in Russia. That's fixed, knock on wood. We haven't had any problems down there for a while. Hopefully we don't. But, again, when I came to NPPC and the focus of the board, the staff, used to be more on new market access, expanding market access. And that's still really important. We've got these huge FTAs on the table that we've got to get through Congress with Korea, Colombia, and so on. But increasingly important now as we export more and more of our product is defending these markets and keeping them open. And really, it's protecting your bottom line. So we're spending more and more time on issues like that. And really, NPPC is spending most of its time these days on China and Russia, two key markets where we're really having some problems. But again, Mexico, we've had 2 safeguard cases and 4 done. Carl's laughing. All these past board members, they've lived through 2 safeguard cases and 4 double cases down there. Not just in 2008 with the border closed. I mean, it's a full-time, we have consultants we use as we become more globally engaged and more dependent on export markets. We've really got to be focused on how things work in those countries, who has access to the top levels of government, working closely with their embassies in Washington to try and keep those markets open. Sometimes we don't like what we hear. We're hearing a lot of that from China and Russia right now. But we've got the best product in the world, and we've just got to be persistent. And because the payoff is great, and as you all know, where's the growth going to be? There's only so much more pork we can sell here, and the growth is for the most part, outside the United States. We had a problem with the Philippines. We supported the efforts of our trade officials. We were very patient, but push came to shove. And so NPPC filed a GSP petition, which in a nutshell is something that would take away the preferential trade benefits that the Philippines get. Most developing countries get they don't pay the full, what's called column A tariff rate on their products because they're developing countries. So, we weren't getting, they wanted to basically jury-rig the quotas in the Philippines and would hurt us. And so, after a lot of patience and dealing with the problem, we decided to play hardball, and it worked out for us. And sometimes, maybe more often than not, it's the, what's the saying, the velvet glove. But, sometimes you need a sledgehammer. And in this case, we got very aggressive, and it turned out to be absolutely the right thing to do. The Trans-Pacific Partnership, I've got some more slides on this, but essentially, last year we really pushed. NPPC spearheaded a letter, not just among all the Washington-based food and ag groups, but the entire private sector. So manufacturing and all sorts of concerns were on the letter. And we really pushed for this. And as it turns out, we built a lot of momentum, and now this is something the Obama administration is pursuing, and that's a really good thing for us. H1N1 is obviously was a very bad thing for the pork industry, but we had at the advent of this, when it just went into the North American human population in late April, we had about 27 countries either that had formally notified of barriers or unofficially through barriers, and we were able, in pretty short order, to get most of those off. Now, I know that we haven't been successful yet in China, and that is a problem. We are shipping product through the Great Channel in China, but we want to get the official channel open there, and we can't elevate the issue any higher. I mean, it was discussed between the presidents when we met. It would not be an overstatement to say it's been the top trade issue between the U.S. and China. It's very frustrating, but again, you just got to be patient and persevere. And they're not going to, I've got some more slides coming up here. These countries, we're the low-cost producer in the world. You know, you can erect the barriers, and we've seen this country after country. Sooner or later, the economics catches up with them. And I think when you look at where this industry's poised and where it's going to go in the future, it's hard for me not to be optimistic. And you know, I've had a ringside seat to this since I came 13 years ago, and it's been pretty darn exciting to be part of. Now, Russia, we had great news. At one point, we doubled the size of the quota for last year. The bad news is they kept delisting plants, and now we've got no plants to ship there. So, again, we've just got to be persistent and keep working these issues. I mentioned China and Russia, Taiwan. I'm going to just briefly talk about it. Mexico, Canada, Cuba. I mean, there's a list that's this long. Any given year, we're exporting to 100 countries or so. There are a lot of problems. There are a lot of issues. But you know what? The more we export, the more challenges we're going to have. That's just the way it is. I wish I could tell you otherwise. TPP I mentioned, we've got the 3 pending FTAs, and there's Doha. We start with Doha. As good as things have been, according to USDA, the average tariff on pork is still 77% worldwide. So we know that there's still a lot of barriers that can be leveled back, so we're even more competitive. And as I mentioned, the EU and Japan continue to be our top priorities, but I think as most of you know, Doha is not moving. There are issues, and some of our trading partners like to point to the U.S., but really, you really need to look no further than India. The Brazilians, the Chinese, the advanced developing countries. They've got to give a little. I think for pork, I see a path to the end zone, but obviously it's not just about pork. I think there continue to be some significant concerns in other sectors of agriculture. I'm not saying we don't have any concerns, but and then in manufacturing, there are concerns in services, So it's going to happen. It's too important to the global economy. But the more countries you get involved in this, it used to be the U.S. and the EU sat down and kind of decided things. It's not the way it works anymore. But, sooner or later it's going to happen. Just like these pending FTAs are going to get passed. I wish I could tell you when. I don't know. But we're going to continue. NPPC is an organization to pump oxygen into these things because the payoff for you all is just too good for us to sit on the sidelines. And again, these FTAs, here are the numbers that Dr. Hayes of Iowa State worked up when the agreements are fully phased in. I mean, these numbers are Panama's small, but it's only 3 million people. And I think we all think that. I mean, Korea, Dr. Hayes had a capital knowledge. The numbers are so good, they're runaway numbers. And again, the Koreans are to be congratulated. They're the first ones in Asia to fully open their markets. It's a really big deal. And that's going to impact Japan and the other Asian nations. I mentioned TPP just to say that, some people say, well, geez, what's the big deal? We already have FTAs with most of these countries, and we do. But that country right there, that's a really important one. They're big porky consumers, and they're going to continue to demand more pork. So that alone is worth the price of admission. But it's even more than that, because some of you are familiar with what's called the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum. And when that was birthed, I think it was the early 90s, the stated goal was to have a Trans-Pacific Free Trade Agreement. And that just hasn't materialized. Well, the TPP is a way to have the U.S. in the driver's seat of a comprehensive, transparent, rules-based FTA that really can become the magnet to attract other countries. Now, I'm not saying that definitely is going to happen. Nobody knows what's going to happen. Certainly there are people in the Obama administration and the Congress that think that way, and that's a good thing for us. But, Vietnam alone is worth the price of admission. And, this is the fastest growing region in the world. Okay, Mexico we talked about again. I know you guys all know this, but, anybody who says NAFTA is good for the pork industry just is not looking at the facts here. I mean, it's just been fabulous for us and for many other sectors of agriculture as well. And I mentioned trucking. It was just this March that Mexico retaliated because the United States isn't abiding by its commitments on trucking. And but we've been working the issue since May of 2007. Anyway, it's fair to say we're not on the list because the Mexican government knows we're doing everything we can. Now, there are a lot more people paying attention now that Mexico has retaliated. We're still involved in the coalition. I was just meeting with officials from the Mexican embassy and other Washington-based reps, not just from agriculture, but from manufacturing and other sectors as well. And we want to stay on the list. And the United States, look, we're the most open and transparent market in the world. But we have some blemishes too. And as an exporting industry, it's really in our best interest to see that the United States also abides by its commitments. Russia, again, here's that meat deal. I mean, we had this blip with Borges food aid, but this is where all the growth has been. And so it's, right now it's very frustrating. We're out of the market, but, we got to look where we're coming from, and I think where we develop that market. I mentioned that, we doubled the size of the quota going into last year, but now the Russians decreased it. Well, we want to fight to get quota back. Hopefully, I don't know about this year, we'd like to, but certainly for 2011 and 2012, as I mentioned, they've delisted all our plants. Well, we're working to get them relisted. We've got a USDA delegation over there in Moscow now. We're working very closely with them. And, the market will reopen. I wish I could tell you it's going to be tomorrow. I don't know. But what I can tell you is we're working on quotas and trying to get it open ASAP. And, long term, we want to smooth out the bumps so that we don't have all these disruptions to trade. And I know it works its way back to your bottom line. We know that. We understand that. And long term, we want to make the trading relationship as peaceful as possible. And one of the things we're trying to impress on the Russians and the Chinese is that, this is a pro-trade industry. We lead the charge on a lot of things. And where there are issues, whether it's the cooked poultry issue with China, or where there are things where we can stand up publicly or behind the scenes and say, look, the law, the facts, the science support this. We're going to do that. In other words, we're trying to be a good neighbor. Again, there's protectionism, there's other forces. I mean, there's a lot of producers in other countries that don't like you all very much. And keeping your product out of the market means higher prices for them. But you all know that's not the way the global economy works. There's great opportunity for us, and we've got to keep pounding on the door. China, again, there is no greater money-making opportunity for pork producers and for the U.S. industry as China. Single greatest money-making opportunity looking at all time. Very frustrating where we are now. We've still got that H1N1 ban in place, but again, we got to be patient and we just got to keep pounding on the door. The numbers are just so they're so mind-boggling. I don't even really want to talk publicly about it, other than to say we're the low-cost producer in the world. They have a very high cost of production. Guess what? It's going to go up and get even higher. But we have not only H1N1, we've got the ractopamine issue. We're working very closely not only with our government, but we're partnering with our government and reaching out to other like-minded trading partners. Looking forward to the Codex meeting this summer. We need to get the plan approved. That's not a silver bullet. It doesn't mean China is going to turn around and allow imports of pork or ractopamine is used in the production process, but it certainly puts more pressure on them to do that. And then the biggest recent issue we've got in China are huge government subsidies being paid to the remedy. These things are eye-popping, and they raise a lot of WTO issues. But again, job number one is to get back in the official trade. Most of what's moving into China now is through the gray market. We have no control over that. We need to get the official trade reopened. But it's the biggest producing and biggest consuming market in the world. China is. Look at this is March numbers again put together by Dr. Hayes. And then when you figure, most economists will tell you that their currency is at least 30% undervalued, and that is going to change. I mean, and they are, it will change. I can't tell you when it's going to change. And then I don't see, when you look at the feed grain situation there, and their middle class is huge, it's growing. You look at the consumers there, the demand for grain-intensive products like ours, I don't care. They use every new technology. They don't have a lot of arable land. They have a lot of people. We got the land. We're the lowest cost producer. Their costs are going to continue to go up. We are very well positioned. We got to take a long-term view, and we got to be very persistent. We're just, even in 2008, I think when you combine the gray market and the official market, I think we're about at $690 million. Hey, that, if you combine, now this I think is looking just at the official trade. If you combine everything that went into China, we were the number one foreign supplier, about half. And gray market and official market together was less than 2% of the global consumption. The opportunity there is tremendous. Taiwan, a lot smaller country than China, but we've got a ractopamine issue there as well, and it's hurting us to the tune of, according to Dr. Hayes, if we got rid of it, it'd be about $150 million in additional sales. So again, we'll work on that issue. We're going to see what happens in the Codex meeting this summer, but it's an important issue for us. And here is some of the conclusions from Dr. Hayes' analysis if we get that wrapped up and dropped. Canada, and I know that with Minnesota's proximity to the border, there's a lot of linkages traditionally between the Canadian industry and the industry in the United States. You all know the history of working some trade cases, and I know some of you were maybe not on the in support of the cases NPPC brought in 2004, but we wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't monitor the situation in Canada and the potential impact on U.S. producers. And this isn't my data, it's not USDA's data, it's not Dr. Hayes' data. This is official Canadian government data. I don't have the most recent data is now and this is in Canadian dollars. And this is public data. We all know that the grain industry tends to be, is subsidized in the U.S. Well, in Canada, the high import sector benefits of the subsidies. And again, in Quebec alone, there's just a history of massive subsidies to the pork industry in that province specifically. But the subsidies are all through Canada. Okay, now if you look at when we brought the trade cases, and I realize that the Canadian dollar has got a lot to do with it, but there was really no risk premium before we brought those cases. And you can see when the herd really started to be reduced in Canada, and after those cases, and the Canadian dollar is just appreciating. And I think there were a lot of people who made the assumption that there was going to be an indefinitely weak Canadian dollar. That turned out not to be the case. We are, we meet regularly with the Canadian producers, some of the current NPPC officers have been part of those meetings. There's a heck of a lot more that we have in common, and a lot of issues we work together. But the reality is that we're more competitive than they are. That's just, and they've got these subsidies, and as NPPC, what we are doing our jobs, we just swept that under the rug. Lastly, if there's time for you to open up a question, I just want to comment that while it's probably not likely that Congress is going to move soon on the FTAs, there is a possibility. I'm not going to say it's a strong likelihood, but we're going to keep pumping oxygen into those FTAs because the opportunity for the industry is just too great. One of the things that Congress is going to look at are the Cuba restrictions. We're not as prejudiced as some of our colleagues in U.S. food and agriculture. Our exports to Cuba actually been going up. We were at about 1.2 million in 2004 and 2008, 12.6. Nevertheless, there's opportunity for growth, and certainly we can benefit by getting rid of the financing restrictions, the travel restrictions, just get rid of the ban, period. So this is something I don't think we're going to be leading the charge as we have in Korea and Colombia. The stakes aren't the same for us, but certainly we're going to be supportive of efforts to further open up and reform trade.
How big is Cuba compared to Panama as far as opportunity?
Oh, it's a bigger opportunity than Panama. Yeah, absolutely. When we look in the Western Hemisphere, obviously Mexico, Colombia is a huge opportunity for us. When you look at Central America and the Caribbean, Dominican Republic, huge opportunity. Cuba is a huge opportunity for us. We're now actually the largest. Not that long ago, we were just a very small supplier. We're now the largest foreign supplier to Cuba. So it is important. But again, it's certainly no South Korea, of course. Yes?
USDA has projected about a 10% increase in exports for 10 versus 09. I think puts us just shy of 2008 in terms of exports. Do you want to comment on that way? I think that's realistic, or high or low? Or?
Well, again, I'm a lobbyist. Some of you guys know this. I should have told you this, but I'm a trade lawyer by training and some private practice for a King NPPC. So I'm a lawyer lobbyist, not an economist. And Steve Meyer tells me periodically it's dangerous when lawyers start talking like economists. Last 2009 is going to be our best year ever, but for 2008, which is really, when we get 50% growth in 2008. You mentioned USDA saying 10%. It's really hard to say. I mean, we've got the Russian problem, we've got the China issue. The dollar looks like it's going to be a weak dollar with a low-cost producer in the world. I can see a scenario where we need that. I think some economists that I really respect can see scenarios where we exceed that. It's just, it's hard to say. I think long-term, to me, the unmistakable trend is on. And it's just more pressure on the trade association and industry leaders to just try and manage there are going to be problems like we're having now with Russia and China. Try and manage that the best we can so that the pass back to the producer is as small as possible. Sir?
Hey, with all talk about China, is there any talk about increasing trade with India, which is supposed to be a bigger population than China before too long?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Most of the world population forecasts say that India will be #1 populous country in the world. There is opportunity there. However, unlike the Chinese are, they have already, even though they're at a significantly lower level of economic development than us or the Europeans, their per capita consumption of pork is already very high. The Chinese people, wherever you go, you find that they're a huge pork-consuming people. And so, Malaysia, for example, is Islamic State, so officially Islamic State, so on the one hand, culturally, religiously, not a lot of opportunity for us, but there's a big Chinese population there, so we sell there. Data lab in Indonesia. India, I think there will be opportunity because a lot of the secular Hindus will probably consume pork. It's something that we've been looking at. The U.S. International Trade Commission just did what's in Washington speak called a Section 332 investigation. And I think if you look at the report, the pork industry is the only industry that had its comments attached to the report. So we have been looking at this. The industry sent people over there. But it is an opportunity, and we've got to continue to look at it, but everything pales in comparison to China, which for us is the absolute number one. Sir?
Is that enthusiasm tempered at all by their priority to establish their own production infrastructure? Weren't they very aggressive about setting up their own?
They're absolutely doing that, and I think U.S. Equipment suppliers and others are having a robust business there. That's really what the subsidies are all about, because most of the production in China is backyard production, and they're losing that. What was the spike up in 08 about? Was it due to the Olympics? There's a lot of different theories. I think part of it was the continued exodus from backyard producers and people out of the so-called informal sector into the formal sector, where the economy's growing, people are getting a job. You got a job, you're basically, in your rural area, you're consigned to be a subsistence farmer. But, in every country, it's really interesting to hear Dr. Hayes talk about this, because those of you who know, he talks with an Irish accent. He grew up in Ireland, and he saw this transformation happen in Ireland. And his contention is it takes about 10 years. And that shift is underway in China, where they still today have a majority of the production supplied by backyard. And the, larger scale commercial stuff is still small. That's why they got this. They can't attract private capital because they don't have a comparative advantage in producing pork. And the government wants to protect the sector. And I think probably viewing pork and a lot of other products, if you look at market penetration, not just for pork, but pretty much anything besides soybeans and cotton, it's really small market penetration. There's only so long you can fight the forces of economics. Okay? So they're doing this, but that production, and that will compete with us. Long term, I do not believe, and I'm talking to people that are a lot more smarter economically than I ever will be. I don't think that they're going to that they are going to be able to compete. And when you look at what's happened, the same things happened in the Japanese, the Koreans. You go down the list, all these countries said, we're going to be self-sufficient in pork. We're going to be self-sufficient in food. Awful hard to fight the laws of economics. Now, it's still very much a command-type economy, essentially a lot of central planning. I mean, they're in an economic metamorphosis. But I think long-term, when you look at this, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for us.
Where does Russia fit on that scale in terms of cost of production? I don't remember if that was on your slide or not.
It's higher than ours. I don't think the opportunity, there's certainly opportunity in Russia. But again, and Russia has been and should continue to be one of our top tier export markets. But again, China's the mother market.
But in terms of cost of production, Russia is not as high as China, right?
I do not believe so.
I'll ask you about one of your favorite topics here, the Mexican and the Canadian WTO challenge to country forced labor. Where do you see that at?
Well, as you point out, it's in dispute settlement litigation of the WTO. And I think most people know where NPPC was on Cool, which was, we opposed it. And our reason for doing that was we felt like it was going to raise the producer's cost of doing business. But it is now law. And I assume you're all abiding by the law. And we certainly, as a trade association, need the industry to abide by the law. And is there any interest in turning this around in the Congress right now? Probably not. Will that change if we lose this case? Probably. Will we lose this case? I don't know. I'm trained as a lawyer. I think the best thing at this point, because the matter is in litigation, is really just to not say much about it.
There's been a tendency, though, at least over the last year or so, for a number of the major packers and exporters that seem like they not wanted to pursue a very aggressive trade agenda, that they're more interested in keeping what we have. And I've heard it again just last week, and I guess in that case, fortunately, unfortunately, we were talking about beef, the same story. But I just wonder what's changed. Why we've had so much success in gaining access and pursuing markets and knocking down barriers and selling product. Why all of a sudden hesitancy to continue that path that we've been on?
John, I think as we export more, the risks are higher. And I think there's been a focus on just protecting existing trade, as you said. But I think, as a staff person for a trade association, I'm being paid to think strategically and long term. And I think that's what the NPPC board is charged with. And I think we're not doing our job if we don't look at things like China and the cost of production of the industry and talk about what could be. I think we have to be careful not to mislead people and to suggest that it's going to happen. But I think, shame on us if we don't seize the opportunity. Our nation is in the midst of making an adjustment. The last century was the American century. And we're still a great country. There's no place in the world I'd rather be. But when, some of you have been around as long as I was, and in the early 1960s, what were the markets? Who could afford to buy products? How important was trade? Even some of the members of the European Union were developing countries back then. It's a different world, and we're a very small part of global economic demand and population, and boy, shame on us if we're not looking down the road to what's coming and trying to figure out how to best position the industry. And I think, with the dislocations of beef, and I'm not suggesting that And I know you weren't, Sean. But there have been dislocations, and they're painful. And we've got to learn. We've got to learn from those things. And, you know, when I said a while ago, more often than not, it's the velvet glove and not the sledgehammer. You know, it's, you attract more flies, mosquitoes, bees with honey, right, and vinegar. And so, you got to be patient, but I really think, shame on us if we don't look at what should be, and if we don't talk about holding our trading partners to their commitments.